think sometimes we don't think we have that power. It comes back to that idea that we look online, we choose things from a menu of options, and we feel like what they have is what we get. And we don't realize that if we share with them what we're not happy about or what we wish we would see, that gives them something to build towards. It's actually a really important feedback loop that probably isn't happening nearly enough.
Take a moment to look around your current environment. Have you ever noticed just how many materials went into the makeup of your immediate surroundings? Materials are everywhere and in everything we come into contact with. And as such, they have a massive impact on us and the planet. And there's a level of complexity in understanding that impact that drew architect Simona Fischer to study them. Today, Simona is the Director of Sustainable Practice at MSR Design based in Minneapolis. And with the knowledge she's gained over the past 10 plus years, she helps educate other designers on how to specify healthier materials and consider reuse as often as possible. What first sparked your interest in sourcing healthier and lower embodied carbon
For
materials?
that, we have to go way back. I went to architecture school. I went back to architecture school with the thought of studying sustainability specifically. And that's when I became interested in materials because I felt like uh, it was easier in some ways to understand energy use reduction or reusing less water, but materials are so complex and they have such um, complicated networks of sourcing and come from around the world that it felt like a really gritty problem, and that interested me.
That is interesting. I know there's, depending on the material, so many parts and components that go into it, and understanding where each of those ingredients comes from, it becomes very just nuanced and layered.
Yes, definitely.
So I was curious, do you recall your first project in which you had to specify or got to specify healthier materials, and what that process was like?
Yeah, so it was an affordable housing multifamily project here in Minneapolis. And uh, what I realized, I was told that we wanted to try and meet the Living Building Challenge on that project. Uh, and it turned out that it was so difficult to get transparent information from manufacturers at the time that it was way more time and research than any of us realized it would be. So it was a pretty steep learning curve and a real um, eye opener as far as what information was not available in the industry at the time. And it was, I was looking for health at the time. It was like ingredients were not disclosed. So that was the big thing. But also, there was not carbon information for most materials, and there was not information on sourcing locations and, um, forced labor or any kind of information related to ecosystem health. It was just a very bare landscape as far as information went.
When was that? I know things have slightly improved, but how long ago was that?
So that project was, I think, actually about 12 years ago, and there was a lot less information available at the time on healthy materials, but also on carbon and all of the other factors that we now look for in materials. A lot has changed since that time. There are a lot more manufacturers that provide transparent information now. It's still an evolution in progress, and I have noticed that there's a trend that interior materials are further ahead than some of the architectural core and shell, exterior cladding structure materials are at this time. So I think us being both an architecture and interior design firm, we have found that our interior designers are leaders in this sphere, partly because of having more information and being able to push manufacturers for more information and them being more ahead as far as providing it and wanting to provide it to us.
Wow, I don't know why that surprises me. I thought it was the other way around for some reason. I thought there was more, I guess, traction in the architectural side, but that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more traction in on the architecture side in building performance aspects like energy and water and those types of things. But in the materials sphere, I think it's partly to do with the way the industry works. Like we have a lot of manufacturers marketing to us to get an edge on their products, and there's maybe a lot more competition in that sphere. So they see it as a competitive edge to try and provide more information. And the I think the one of the challenges we run into is that our designers need to learn to tell good information from greenwashing. There's a lot of greenwashing out there, and it's not always ill intentioned. Sometimes it's just the fact that uh, the manufacturer's rep doesn't necessarily know, and so they give their best information in the moment, or maybe they don't have a strong, sustainable design director kind of figuring out the data behind things. So the message can get garbled. So we're really at a point right now where our internal education and standardizing language across the industry and materials is a big theme.
I want to ask you more about that, but I just to jump back to that first project on the affordable housing. So were you able to execute it and meet the living building challenge, or was it too challenging to get just information?
Yeah, it ended up being not possible to do certification on that project. It was a great learning curve. Almost everyone who worked on that project went on to do something interesting in the material or material health realm, including the client went on to become the director of Habitable, the uh, genus organic. So a big shout out to the work that they do. It was not possible because it just was so much more work, and it ended up putting so much pressure on the team to deliver an amount of research that we didn't know we uh, were going to be doing, that it didn't fit in the budget. So a lot of questions came out of that around how you plan for that kind of project.
Yeah, I mean, 12 years ago to try to find it's still a challenge to try to get that information on material health and the ingredients, and I can't even imagine, but that's amazing. I read that story about Gina and Inhabitable, and I didn't realize that was connected to a project that you all had worked on. That's really amazing. So to get into the material health and how you're educating your internal team on how to build your material library, um, have you created like a workflow or certain go-to tools that you use regularly?
We created a material library entry criteria document that is a one pager that we use as a communication tool. So when product reps come into our office, we have this page ready. It's actually on the booking system for when they want to book a product update with us. We outline that we are interested in transparency around ingredients. We need to see an ingredient list. We want to see embodied carbon information. And then we also actually list the other three categories of the AIA Materials Pledge, which we're a signatory of. So we're looking for eco labels, ecosystem health. We're looking for social health information, which is about avoiding forced labor. And we're looking for circularity, which is kind of an interesting one. It's not just about recycled content, it's partly about take back programs and other things. So we have this document. We share it with every rep that comes in, and we ask them to pre screen products that they're bringing in. So if they don't have the transparency information, or we have kind of a checklist of worst in class ingredients that we don't want to see. If they contain those ingredients, we just say, hey, you as a rep are important to us and your relationship is what's important, but don't bring us products we don't want to see, just bring us your best products. So we're trying to separate out the idea that we would be rejecting someone because we're rejecting some of the products, but still be clear about the products that we don't want to see.
I guess as far as documentation, do you require that they have um, EPDs or the health product declarations or
Yeah, there are a couple of different methods. Health product declaration, a declare label, some other disclosure of material ingredients. There are a couple different formats they could use for the ingredient side of things. For the carbon side of things, we'd prefer to see an EPD, an environmental product declaration, with the global warming potential listed on it. But if they don't have an EPD, because those can be a little more expensive to commission by the manufacturer, then we would accept any other kind of life cycle assessment that seemed credible. And we also use other tools. We sometimes look at EC3, which is a build transparency tool that gives you ranges for a lot of product categories. So if they say, well, here's our unofficial LCA, here's our carbon number, we can look at EC3 and be like, yeah, that's in the realm. We accept that as a number. Those are the two big ones for which it's easier to have a very clear list. The social health, the ecosystem health, the circularity, those three are a little more unique at this time. Uh, but still, the more groundbreaking leading manufacturers are starting to have that information.
that's refreshing to hear. When you guys are perhaps researching materials on your own rather than having a vendor come in, are there certain tools you use like mindful materials or material bank?
Both material bank, mindful materials. We use the AIA framework for design excellence, which has under the resources category, they have kind of a things to focus on, kind of top 10 list of recommendations. We look at databases like Building Ease. We've looked at ACE Lab. There are a lot of tools out there right now. I've heard a lot of good things about Ecomedes. I've spoken with the Red to Green folks. We've used that on our certified LBC project. There are so many tools out there.
There was a few you mentioned that I haven't heard of, so I'll have to do some digging on those. That's really interesting. I was reading about the renovation of the MSR studio in Minneapolis and that it earned the Living Building Challenge Pedal certification, and you were able to incorporate more than 100 red list free materials and reduce the embodied carbon footprint by sourcing more salvaged materials. So I was just curious, how did you vet those materials that you used in the renovation? Was it similar to the process that you described?
Yeah, so that was an interesting process. When we started that project in 2019, we thought we're just going to take our typical materials palette, we're going to vet everything that we want to use, and then we will just have a subset of that palette, and that's what we'll apply in our space. And what really happened was we realized pretty quickly that the amount of research was going to be so daunting and takes so much time and that costs money that we needed to take a different approach. So we kind of scrapped mentally all of the stuff that we would normally use and we started over and we thought to ourselves, what is the simplest palette that we can come up with that will be the least amount of time spent vetting? It was a more natural palette. It was a simpler palette. It was really just a few things focusing on stone, wood, glass, metal, pretty pared down. And then we dove in to the vetting process. and it was still quite a bit of research, but you can get through it. You just have to be organized, use tools like red to green to organize your data that you collect. And then we were needing to do the carbon footprint calculation. And so we were like, okay, what is this picture of carbon like? Because at that point, you have to pay a carbon offset for the amount of carbon you emit. The carbon calculation was actually then kind of a second eye opener. We realized that if we could use some more salvaged stuff, that doesn't count towards your carbon footprint because you're reusing, you're not commissioning new things to be made. So we had originally been thinking that we would get all new furniture because people often think that, like, we're moving to a new space. Why wouldn't we get new furniture? We built our own little calculator to be able to calculate the impact of furniture. And it turns out the carbon emissions from furniture are really high. So it really shifted our thinking into how could we maybe rebuild our desks and put different legs on them so that they're sit to stand now and keep the surfaces because they were just plain white surfaces. And, I guess we could have gotten wood surfaces, but we had these PLAM surfaces and we were like, these desks are okay. And our chairs can be refurbished. They are okay. And we can accept that. It's a much lower footprint, much lower cost of offsetting. And that aesthetic ended up kind of permeating the space. We had originally, I thought about putting more carpet down. Carpet has a very high carbon footprint. So we peeled back the amount of carpet just to the areas where it provided an acoustic function. And we were left with this very raw floor with like concrete and travertine because it was a historic building that we were in. And the our landlord had said, like, well, of course you're probably just going to cover up this floor. And we were like, well, I mean, if we don't use that much carpet, we don't have to pay for that carbon. And are we okay with this kind of raw exposed floor that tells the history of the space? We decided we were okay with that.
That's really cool. I love repurposing items. But I was curious with that, how do you then get into like the material health of something? Because it's such a great way to reduce the carbon footprint, but then how do you go back, particularly if you don't know the history of the material or the item? Um, is that, I mean, was that a concern, or how do you go about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Uh, in a certain sense, they give you a little bit of an out. If it's a certain, for a lot of materials, they say if it's reused and if you're not creating some kind of secondary market for reused toxic things, they go a little easier in terms of their requirements for material ingredient vetting. So the short answer is we didn't have to look up the ingredients of the concrete mix that was already on the floor, or we didn't need to look up the ingredients in the fireproofing that was already on the ceiling. What they try to mitigate is it really comes down to reusing plastic in such a way that you're creating a demand for more plastic. So you don't have to do a lot of ingredient vetting when you salvage things. And it's kind of one of the it's it's one of the secrets to the living building challenge is that if you reuse, you can do less research. And so it just there's a synergy there of less carbon, less stuff in the world, less waste, less money, less time, all of it lines up. It's one of the best ways to do an LBC project.
And uh, even in many ways, you often end up with a design or an aesthetic that has more of a story to it, has more character.
Yeah, exactly. I think the thing that we didn't expect when we went into LBC and started doing salvage materials is how much fun it would be to work with salvage materials. Our marble countertops came from a building down the street that was being renovated. They're Carrara marble wall paneling from the 1920s. Old, you wouldn't be able to afford that material now, but we got to take it off the walls. We found a fabricator who was able to refinish it. We put it in our space as countertops. It has a little bit of a wabi-sabi quality, but we really like that. And it has this beautiful feel, just like the smooth feeling of this historic material. And it wasn't just the outcome, it was the finding the fabricator. It was like that hands-on process that I think architects and designers sometimes don't get anymore. We're often very removed from the materials. The manufacturers do it. We look at it online, we get a little tiny sample, we order it, it all gets installed by someone else. We go check it off a list at some point. We were much more involved in the materiality, and that was genuinely enjoyable.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would imagine that that would feel a little gratifying, almost like you kind of handmade something or that same type of feeling.
We had a hand in it. Yeah, exactly.
And I know that you have since really advocated for reuse in a lot of projects. Is it challenging to source or find these things?
Reused materials are everywhere. A lot of the work that all of us do around the country is renovating spaces that exist. Every time you renovate, that space is full of stuff. So I think the number one source to look at is the thing that you are walking into in the first place. I've had the opportunity in the last year and a half to work with Hennepin County on a reuse guide for how to get reused materials into the workflow and the process of design and design delivery. And it's been a very interesting project. We've had the opportunity to talk to designers and contractors and people around the country. Uh, and they show us all of these beautiful renovations that they've done where they kept a carpet that nobody thought looked very good in the space, but they built a new materials palette around it. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, if you pair it with those colors and textures, all of a sudden, what old carpet? It looks like it could be new. So I think in that way, designers really are in the driver's seat as far as making reuse happen. Uh, there, a lot of people want to talk about maybe the virtue of reusing things and not throwing them away. And there's definitely an important story to be had there about reducing waste. But in my mind, maybe the more interesting story is how do we make these things beautiful using our talents and make these things so attractive that our clients really want that. That's that's an interesting power that we have and a thing that we could tap into.
I love that. And it's that's such a I think a cool opportunity for designers too to kind of going back to what you were talking about earlier about having your hand in the design and what a cool problem to solve too or a challenge to overcome.
I should jump in though and say to answer your question as far as sourcing materials. So I do think starting in the space where you are is a great place to be and to play off of what you've got available. But people might check out the All for Reuse ecosystem map, which is a map of different local or regional reuse suppliers around the country. And it also, I mean, it's a map of all things related to that. So deconstruction contractors. Um, I think many people may have heard of like Reaply or some of the different systems that are evolving that are more national. But reuse is often very local, which is kind of cool because that has implications for building the local economy and supporting local vendors and also just reducing the footprint of even carrying things around the country and expecting them to be distributed nationwide.
So it's called All for Reuse.
.org.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. That sounds amazing. Slightly shifting gears, though it kind of ties into this talk about reuse and having to find people that can help you, perhaps retool or um, resurface countertops or millwork or things like that. But I was reading that through the process of the studio becoming LBC certified, that the team also had to train a couple of the vendors that you were working with to secure that accreditation. What was that process like? Are vendors generally receptive to this?
Yeah, I mean, vendors want to sell their products to us. So I think it goes back to that theme of how much power architects and designers have in this sphere. When we went to them and we were like, if you had, it was in one of the cases, it was FSC accreditation, so chain of custody certification to be able to um, source sustainably harvested wood and to be able to tell what forest it came from. They saw that as an opportunity to be able to offer that on other projects, and they appreciated that we could give them some guidance. So we we found a we weren't making an unreasonable demand. We went out there and we asked around who's interested in pursuing this with us and found a partner who wanted to go along that journey. And I think that's pretty similar. We've had a lot of manufacturers who've reached out based on our library entry criteria document and asked us questions about, what new products they have coming out. Do we have any feedback on how that aligns with our criteria or any other sustainability issue that we see with it? And I'm always happy to speak to manufacturers about that. Like if I see an issue where I think they could be providing it without some kind of microplastic ingredient, I will point it out. I'm not a product engineer, so I can only advise so far, but I can speak from the point of view of both a sustainability professional and from the point of view of my clients. And my clients want healthy spaces, they want sustainable spaces. Sometimes when you're deep in R&D on a product, you don't necessarily, well, it seems like maybe there isn't necessarily, you know, green chemistry and end user health at the top of mind. It's kind of more about product functionality and durability, and those are important too. But there's sometimes room to weed out some stuff that doesn't need to be there. So yeah, I would say vendors are interested. They want to evolve.
That's really good to hear. I guess you really just have to ask. And
You have to ask, and we have to. It's actually a really important point you bring up because I think sometimes we don't think we have that power. It comes back to that idea that we we look online, we choose things from a menu of options, and we feel like what what they have is what we get, and we don't realize that if we share with them what we're not happy about or what we wish we would see, that gives them something to build towards. It's actually a really important feedback loop that probably isn't happening nearly enough.
yeah, that's such a good point. And uh, I would imagine, it helps kind of future proof their business as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Jumping back to the salvaged items, is there maybe one of the coolest items that you procured that sticks out in your mind?
For me, it's really the furniture story and that aha moment that happened in our office when we realized that uh, if we just rebuilt some of our furniture to suit our needs and we had these Herman Miller chairs. If we talked to Herman Miller about the parts that could be um, upgraded and just do some spot upgrades on that, we were able to kind of like build out what we needed and we didn't have to buy all new stuff. And in an open plan office, furniture is often one of the highest footprints in all the different ways. And also, furniture is kind of a ghost footprint. It doesn't show up in a lot of whole building life cycle assessment modeling tools. There just isn't, there's no button to click to say we have this much furniture. So it was such a great story that we were able to reuse that, and even after making that decision, we learned more and more about what an impactful decision that had been.
That's really cool and very motivating too. And again, it yeah, it goes back to the collaboration with the supplier or the brand or vendor.
It is. There is an element there, though, that is also a bit counterculture because furniture vendors, if it's coming straight from manufacturers, they may just want to sell you new stuff. Some furniture vendors are really, forward thinking about this, and they think about taking their own product back and refurbishing it and offering it used, but not everyone does. So maybe that's a theme with me, taking ownership over what we can do and not necessarily relying on manufacturers to solve it for us.
Yeah, and that is a good point too, because at the end of the day, they rely on the sales, the repeat sales, and want you to purchase new furniture. So yeah,
There's a little bit of a tension there. Yeah.
for designers who maybe just be getting started in specifying healthier materials and perhaps lower embodied carbon materials, where do you recommend they start? How can they start to build their own library?
Well, we offer some things for download, so people can download our library entry criteria from our website if they want a template. And our position is that if you want to copy that and make a version with your name on it and hand it out to your product reps, you're welcome to do that. We also have a sustainable materials action packet, which is a little more deep dive. It's really a million links, but it's everything that I'm aware of that landscape changes all the time, but a ton of different resources that can help them get started. I think they should look at the AIA materials pledge, the 5 impact categories, and get familiar with that. They might consider signing the pledge and looking for education in those different topic areas. They might be interested in the Design for Freedom toolkit from Grace Farms, which looks deeply at social health. That's an area that's really growing right now. I think there's a self education curve of checking out all those different resources. And one of the things that I have heard about, I have not pursued this, but I'm interested, is the Sustainable Materials Certificate Program from the Parsons School. I've heard good things.
I went through that program, and I think it was a few years ago, and I think that they have since built upon it and adapted it in some ways, but it was very valuable.
Yeah, I think it used to focus more on health, and now they've expanded it to be broader.
That would make sense. Yes. It was a great course.
And maybe one other thing I would say is I sometimes think about how, the Michael Pollan quote of like eat food, not too much, mostly plants. I think there's some kind of similar statement that could be made about materials, like um, simplify your materials, try to avoid plastic, get to know your plastics and try to phase those out of products. If you start thinking about avoiding plastic as a category, um, you will be astonished where that journey will take you, I think. And the other thing would be get familiar with those carbon data points or carbon benchmarks for different product types in EC3. Because if you can kind of look at it, look at the ingredients, think about plastics, think about the sourcing, and is it beautiful rare wood from the Amazon, or is it something very renewable from a regional source, and have that idea of a carbon number in your head. That's a pretty holistic view that will get you a long ways.
Thank you for mentioning that. You're actually the on the last podcast, someone brought up the Pollan quote. Yeah, used it in context of build shelter, not too big, mostly plants.
That's awesome. I love that.
It's a reoccurring theme and such a good way to kind of because I think a lot of this can get really overwhelming, but it's such a great way to kind of root down, back to the basics. Going back to one of the tools you mentioned earlier, is EC3 one of your go-to tools for understanding a material's carbon impact?
It's a tool that lets you look at what the average would be for like acoustic ceilings or carpet or gypsum wallboard. It shows you some industry averages so that when you look at the EPD and you see that carbon number, you can benchmark it against something in a database, or like you can benchmark it against a number, an average out there, and tell whether it's low or high. Also, it lets you search for individual products. So there's some functionality there. If you just want to look up the carbon, it might actually even be in the database of a product.
Are there any materials that you're really liking right now that kind of cross off all of the health, low embodied carbon, things like that?
Well, this is an odd one. It's not a brand. I'm really interested in hemp right now, and hempcrete, like a hemp lime mixture that can be used to make exterior walls. Hemp is an incredibly interesting plant. I am just learning about it, but there is so much going on in the realm of natural materials right now, and building codes, and how we can build with something that can be grown locally. So I'm really into the natural materials learning curve right now.
It's such a fascinating area. Before we departed, Simona said something that, in my opinion, was pretty poetic about materials, and it put a proverbial bow on the idea of taking ownership over the ones we choose to use.
Materials are fun. I love it when people want to nerd out about them. Everything in the world is made of materials, so there's there's real meaning in getting to know our materials, uh, and choosing materials that we feel connected to on every level.